Oh, welcome into the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You figured that out because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. I don't know. We might be moving this show to Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays in the afternoon more than the morning. As much as I loved doing this show in the morning, the viewer numbers on this program, this here show, this little labor of love that we all kind of participate in together, it has done much better in the afternoons than it did in the morning. So I'm not totally positive yet, but if you ever look in the description, it says, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Russ Joy at 8:30 a.m. is here to break it all down for you. And I did look. I am late on the 8:30 front. But if you're in Honolulu, I'm only 19 minutes off of the 8:30 start. So that's not so bad. Feels like a totally different world, though, doesn't it? Now, I will tell you, there's a lot of stuff going on this week, next week, next month. There's going to be some interrupted scheduling stuff here with this show. Next week, I have to figure out if I'm taking all the recording stuff to Florida or not. I might be. I probably will. And then I guess I'll do the show from a hotel room, which is going to be something. Maybe I'll have a nice backdrop. What if there's a balcony, like the water in the background or something? That'd be really great. Can you imagine the poor suckers? Because at that point, I'll have to do the show probably in the morning. Can you imagine the poor people who wake up one morning and they hear, "Oh, welcome into the Russ Joy Show" at 8 in the morning or 7:30 in the morning? I don't know. We'll figure it out. I might get a guest or two. Maybe we'll pre-record a little bit. Maybe we'll go live. I don't know. We'll keep you all posted. A lot of stuff going on. Next week's going to be a week. We'll figure it out together. Now, this show today and this channel and all this stuff, I have to thank everybody before we get into the actual topics on hand, because as those of you who follow me on the social media over on X, Facebook, I logged into Threads for the first time in a very long time. The channel got over 1,000 subscribers, which I was thrilled about. It's been 10 months of this show. We did the drive to 500, which worked out really well. Linda Joseph won that Saquon Barkley Super Bowl jersey. I've yet to receive a picture of Linda Joseph wearing the Super Bowl jersey, which I'm sure is going to have Ford and other people incensed, but that was fun. And then in the last few months, I brought Video Guy Amadeo on. He's done a great job, short-form content guru, and clipping up the episodes themselves and bringing in new people through that way. So the channel got over 1,000 people, which is really, really exciting, and I'm very grateful for. Very few things are going to change here with the show. You may get the occasional ad on YouTube. If you've been listening in the podcast feed, you're used to it. Why are we doing this? It's due in part to paying young Amadeo. So these are the things that we do. Now, I will try not to bombard you with live ads, and I don't have full control over them. I could, if I did the show a different way on YouTube, I could control them, but I can't. So if I'm in the middle of ranting and raving about something and you get interrupted with an ad from BetMGM or an ad from, I don't know, Helix Sleep or something, don't blame me. I'm just trying to get the video guy paid. He's been paid on time for months now. Don't worry, there is money. But I digress. It's been a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. Now, there are things going on today, and here you go. Video guy Amadeo dropping the monies in here. Says blame me. Nah, we're not. We're not blaming you. By the way, Zilla is correct. Those here hit the like button. The videos have been doing well. The episodes have been doing well. I'm very, very excited. Raymond Supper over on YouTube asks, what part of Florida? Fort Lauderdale. There's a work conference going on down there. And I found out I get to do something really, really cool while I'm down there. I'm not going to say it ahead of time, but there's something really cool, and I'll probably post on social media about it when it happens, but there is some really cool stuff going on down in Florida. I'm looking forward to it. I always enjoy getting to go do these work conferences, meet with the people that I meet with on a weekly or bi-weekly, sometimes a monthly basis, and apparently I'm going to go to Canada next month to go meet with some new partners that we're working with at work. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of good stuff. A lot of productive conversations. It's I feel like a big boy. I'm going to a big boy job. So it's very exciting. Anyway, Greg Pontarenko over on YouTube says, good afternoon, all. Mr. Bone99 says, only once in 30 years has a team gone from 4th to 1st in the draft lottery, that being Florida in 2005. Mr. Bone, this could be the second time in 30 years or in 31 years. I don't know exactly how many drafts, but many drafts. It is a highly unlikely situation that the Flyers are going to jump to number 1 And listen, the percentages, we can get to them in a little bit. Your percentage likelihood of moving down in the draft is higher than moving up. It's actually pretty simple math. There are graphs and such to kind of explain to you and show you why. I saw a few people who claim to be hockey people who earlier today were bemoaning this on social media. I can't believe how stupid the NHL is. You finish fourth, you finish wherever you finish, and you're going to move down. It makes no sense. Well, there are more positions for you to move down to than up. In fairness, you can only move down 2 slots, but I'll pull it up here just to give you an idea, because there was somebody who dropped this over. Let's see, we have this over on Tankathon. I'll walk you through it really quick, because this really is the thing that I think has people, especially hockey fans, especially Flyers fans, the most intrigued. As we're recording the show, it's just over 4 hours until they go live with the draft lottery. It's going to happen at 7 o'clock, and it's not going to be the thing like where they do the lottery balls in like some other room and then they come out and they just like pull the envelopes or pull the cards from the envelopes. They're actually going to do the drawing live on TV. So the teams are going to learn about it at the exact same time as all of us at home. Reminder, if you're on YouTube TV, you hit the up thing to where the bar is. There's the 3 dots. Hit that. You go over to the delay and change it from default to decreased. And you'll have a better chance of seeing things happen, without the 8 to 10 second delay, depending on your internet connection and YouTube TV. But you want to make sure that you're as close to being able to find out when it happens as possible. Now, there are a lot of things, there are a lot of reasons that things are going to get kind of wonky tonight. And there are people who are obviously very worried about what it means for the Flyers. I will just point out the same thing that I've been saying consistently now for months. The Flyers now finishing and entering this draft lottery at number 4 means that the worst they could do is the number 6 pick. And in a draft that is widely considered to have 6 very good players, and then maybe a fringe 7th or 8th that could sort of be on that same level, you want to make sure that you're in the top 6. The Flyers cannot fall out of the top 6. That's your good news. Your bad news is, if you're looking at trying to move up to 1 or trying to move up to 2, you don't have a particularly great chance of that. And there is, of course, a very high likelihood, a high probability that you could end up moving down. Now, the reason that I mentioned before that, the way that this works is you have a higher percentage of going down than coming up. This happens across the board. And I'm going to show you a much more detailed, graph than some might be used to seeing. But it's just to kind of illustrate the point and illustrate why it is that, it is not a grand conspiracy against the Philadelphia Flyers. It's not a grand conspiracy against whatever team you watch. And if the YouTube algorithm pushed you here and you're a Sharks fan, all 5 of you, or you're a Blackhawks fan, or you're a Predators fan, or whatever, I'll just really quickly break this down for you. Let's take a gander over here real quick. So this is the percentage chances for each team of getting each pick. So the Flyers enter tonight at number 4. They have a 9.5% chance of going up to number 1. They have a 9.5% chance of going up to number 2. They have a 0.3 chance of going to number 3, which we'll explain in a second. And then you can see number 4, 15.4% chance, which is obviously higher than 9.5 or 9.5. If you were to add these two together, you have a 19% chance of getting one of the top 2 picks potentially, which still outweighs 15.4. Your highest probability is to actually fall 1 spot to number 5. And then your second highest odds are to fall 2 spots to number 6. But you'll see that this is mirrored out. The same general concept exists as you get a little bit farther down. Now, what you will also notice is that this 0.3. Let's talk about this. The way that the draft lottery is done, they do the lottery for the number 2 spot. They do the lottery for the number 1 spot. The most a team can jump that is in this draft lottery is 10 spots. So let's just say, hypothetically, Vancouver. Let's go to Vancouver. Vancouver has a 1.1% chance of moving all the way up to number 5. Why could they only get up to number 5? Because they can only jump up 10 spots. And 10 spots for them is number 4. Okay. They would actually get penalized. If Vancouver were to somehow win the draft lottery, they can't draft number 1 overall. It is something that the league has instituted. You'll see here that for number 12 through 16, you simply cannot win the draft lottery and get the number 1 overall pick. If by some fluke, Calgary or a Vancouver, Utah, Columbus, or Detroit win the number 1 overall pick, they don't actually get that pick. They will slot down to the highest available spot. They'll do the draft lottery poll for the other top spot, and then everyone will just go in reverse chronological or in reverse order based on total points. So I don't know if that's like confusing to anybody or not, but the reason that the Flyers technically have a 0.3% chance is because in theory, you could have a team like Detroit jump, get what would be the number 1 overall spot, which you can't have. Instead, they get moved down to the number 2 pick. By virtue of them going up, the Flyers shift down. Like, it's fine. Very, very unlikely the Flyers are going to land in that number 3 spot. It simply will not happen. So feel good about that, my friends. Number 3 ain't happening. Now, 9.5% chance of that number 1 overall spot. That's probably Schaefer, who actually does have the potential, right, to be a number 1 defenseman, a legit 1D. Now, I've seen a lot of people getting incensed, and I'll see if I can pull it up from Twitter a little bit earlier. I'm going to give you the breakdown of like what I think this means by the hockey gods. But the number 1 spot, if you get it and you're the Flyers, you really do have to consider taking Schaefer. Now, I understand that a lot of people are going to say, hey, they need a center, they need a 1C, and you're not wrong. You're actually right. But if we're being fair about this team and what this team needs, and what this team needs long-term to be a cup contender, they need a 1D, a 1C, and a 1G. They have none of them as of right now. You could make the case that they have a semi-competent blue line if you really want to go that far, but they have no one. There is not a single soul right now at the NHL level or in the system that projects to be a number 1D. If you're holding out hope that Oliver Bonk is that guy, he is not. At least that is not how he's viewed internally. Travis Sanheim could be a number 1 pair defenseman. He's not a true dominant 1D, nor does he really seem to have the upside to get there. Certainly Igor Zamula does not have that. Emil Andre does not have that. Ideally, Jamie Drysdale could develop into being a guy who, if he's not a top pair defenseman, is a second pair defenseman who is the QB on the top power play unit, and there's still a lot of value in that, but you don't really have a guy who has 1D potential. So if you get that number 1 pick, and if you believe Schaefer is going to be a number 1D, that's where you go. I will actually point out the fact that way back when, year and a half ago, the start of 2 seasons ago, Keith Jones, as part of the triad of people who came on to Snow the Goalie in the beginning of the year, really talked about the importance of that number 1 defenseman and how hard it is to find that person, how hard it is to find that number 1 defenseman, and how critical it is to the long-term success of your team to get it. So while most people will scream and yell that you need to take whatever the best center is or the best forward is, a lot of people say Misa, that's who they want. If you get that number 1 overall pick, you have to think about Schaefer. You'd be doing a disservice not to. And of the people that I talk to who do pay attention to these players throughout the year, attend some of their games in person, all that, the widely held belief right now is that Schaefer is the best player. He's probably the most ready to step into the NHL. Might not do it at the start of next season, but is probably the closest thing to an NHL-ready player in this draft of guys that are going to be taken in the top 6, let's say. Now, if that doesn't happen, you're looking at, can the Flyers get up to number 2? And if so, then they get their selection, or they get their choice of forwards, of which there are many. And if we want to go over to some of the prospect rankings that they have here, and I believe that this is built up off of a few models, but it also includes some of the input of top prognosticators. You have that idea of Schaefer. Now, again, Misa here, the way that they have this, where they have Schaefer and Misa in like kind of a category of their own, then Porter Martone, Hagens, Frondel, Denoye in tier 2. Again, that's still 6. Eklund, I've seen some people say could go as high as 4. And then McQueen is a guy who, like, it really depends. The frame is huge. 6'5" center. That's hard to teach. In fact, you can't teach 6'5". You either are or you're not. he has the back issue, and that could cause him to slide, which actually does lead me to something good that happened over the weekend in a Game 7 and something that could ultimately maybe pay dividends for the Flyers if McQueen were to start to fall. We'll come back to that in a second. So again, Schaefer, probably the best player in the draft overall. If you're the Flyers and you need a 1D and you need a 1C and you need a 1G, beggars can't be choosers. I say take the best player available. You don't have to really worry about position at that point. Take the best guy on the board. Now, if it does end up happening that you get the number 2 pick and Schaefer's gone, take Misa. If you think he's the best center on the board, great. If they like Hagens and they think Hagens is good enough to be the number 2, fine. You're probably not going to trade down. If you were to get, and we can kind of go back over to the pick odds thing again. If you were to stay at number 4 or fall to number 5 or even fall to number 6, and we come back over to these prospects, and like let's say a Frondel is falling and he gets to you at number 5, you're probably still happy with that pick. Now, if you get to number 6 and your choices are Denoye, Eklund, McQueen, then you have a little bit of a tough choice to make. And this is where you're going to have to rely heavily on your scouts. I think if you fall anywhere in the top 5, this is consensus that these guys are going to be, some version of this will be taken in the top 5. Now, there have been some mocks that have had Hagens fall to number 6. I think there were a couple more recently that maybe even had him falling a little bit further. But if you're a Flyers fan, the good news here is, even if the Flyers were to fall, even if they were to fall out of that top 4, or they don't get to number 1, they don't get to number 2, the weird 0.3% chance of them getting to number 3 doesn't happen, they don't stay at number 4, they fall to 5, or they fall to 6, you're still going to get a really good player. And we aren't going to look back at this and say, oh, those damn Flyers, they went on a run with Bradshaw as coach, and it cost them the legitimate opportunity to get the number 1 overall pick. If you just pay attention, like if you want to go crazy like that, and you want to look at the 8-point differential between Nashville and the Flyers, and you look at the Shaw little bump after the Torts firing, and you decide to drive yourself nuts, keep in mind again, 11.5% chance of number 1, 11.5% chance of the number 2 overall pick. It doesn't fundamentally change everything. Now, I'm sure if somebody jumps, we'll all freak out. If Pittsburgh somehow jumps up to 1 or 2, we're going to hate it. If the if the Islanders, were to jump up, we'll probably hate it. If Boston somehow gets one of the top 2, we'll hate it. That's just to give you a general overview, though, of like, this is what's on the line for the Flyers tonight. Now, for the first time in the history of the show, we got a super chat. And so I'm going to go over to Zilla, who was very, very kind. Zilla, golly gee willikers, supporting the show. Video guy Amadeo smiling somewhere, probably in the comments himself. Zilla with a $19.99 super chat. You don't have to do that, but I do appreciate it. Super chat is very nice. It says, manifesting us into the number 1 overall pick with a super chat, but as the Wish, a.k.a. Marvel version of MJ in their Spidey says, expect disappointment and you won't be disappointed. I'm still mad over JVR, Patrick, and non-redheaded / flat MJ. There was another video. There was another movie somewhere where they said, like, set unbelievably low expectations and you'll never be disappointed a day in your life. I don't like to set really low expectations, but like sometimes it is kind of good, and then you jump in, and you end up doing way better, and then everybody's like very happy with you, as opposed to setting unrealistically high expectations and then not meeting it, and then you feel like a failure every day of your life. That's not my kind of thing. Now, Zilla did bring up the JVR and the Nolan Patrick thing, and I went through some scenarios today. I put it out on Twitter. But I had some legitimate scenarios, and this is, in fairness, like my thoughts on this have not changed since I put this out this morning. I'm going to try to get this tweet up here. However, Elon Musk's ex is trying to get me to promote. I don't want to promote. I'm not promoting to 100,000 people. I don't care. There we go. I got it. I just want to run through what I think this means for the Flyers, depending on where they finish, from the hockey gods' perspective, because I think that is important. You have to keep perspective as you get ready for the draft lottery tonight. All right, so here it is. I said, if the Flyers get the number 1 overall pick, it's karmic compensation for Nolan Patrick and JVR. You get a legit number 1 defenseman prospect, a 1D. If you get the number 2 pick, that's the same as number 1, karmic compensation for Nolan Patrick and JVR, but they get their choice of forward. Number 3 overall pick at a 0.3% chance would be a reward for culture. The Flyers didn't effectively try to tear this thing down. They didn't essentially try to race to the bottom from the start of the season. They preached culture, 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 and they still finished near the bottom of the league, but they tried. And maybe they get rewarded. They get to move up a little bit. Okay. Number 4, if they stay at number 4, it just means that there's some indifference from the hockey gods, which in fairness, I wouldn't blame the hockey gods for being indifferent to the Flyers, given their lack of success for the past decade, with a couple of outlier things like a bubble playoff season notwithstanding. Falling to the number 5 spot would indicate that the hockey gods are just Torts fans, and they're exacting a little bit of revenge for the booting of Torts from the city. And if the Flyers fall to number 6, it just means that somebody, maybe the hockey gods, puked all over themselves. We don't want to entertain the idea of falling to number 6, but we do have to acknowledge that it is a realistic possibility. I'm going to go out to the comments because I saw a bunch of people putting stuff in the chat, and we got to get to it. We got to find out what's going on with people. Gritty 8 Glenn Rivers on X, I love that name, says, "Let's go. Today's the day the sun is shining." Let's see. Jamie Rollo asks, any kind of Snow the Goalie show tonight for the lottery? No. If I brought up the idea of doing a lottery show with Ant and Bundy, they would berate me. There's no chance it happens. Now, will there be a lottery version of this show tonight? It is possible. I can't fully commit to it yet. We have to split the kids up for different activities tonight. If I can get back here in time to do a lottery show, then tune in. We'll do a lottery show. We'll react live together. And I would hope that the Flyers do well and maybe move up, because if they fall, I might cry on a live stream. We don't want that. But no, I don't expect there to be a Snow the Goalie tonight. Will there be a Snow the Goalie this week? I think so, because we were texting about Game 7 last night, so I would think that there's a good chance. JH says, glad the show survived the weekend after the Universe Sabotage Fridays episode. Yeah, it was bad. There was the 3-minute tech thing. I went back in. I don't know what happened on Friday, but it was really sad. Let's see. Max Miller over on YouTube says, Russ, I'm feeling strangely optimistic about tonight's lottery. Max, from your words, from your fingers on the keyboard to the ears of the hockey gods, I would like to believe that there could be a little bit of positivity. I feel like at some point you have to get a little bit of lottery luck. One could make the argument that, the Flyers, they've gotten to pick at number 2 before. It just hasn't worked out either time. JVR kind of worked, but Patrick Kane was before him, and Patrick Kane won multiple cups, and was a really, really good player. JVR was an okay player, good dude, but no, just not even remotely close to the same caliber of player. And then there's Nolan Patrick, and had the concussions, and Nolan Patrick happened to be taken around the same time that Markelle Fultz and Ben Simmons and Mickey Moniak and Carson Wentz, and just not a great time in Philadelphia sports. So we are waiting for the karmic payback and karmic payoff. And some might say that Matvei Mishkov falling to number 7 was that, but I will give you that Mishkov falling might have been karmic payback of sorts for Patrick, but where's our JVR? But we haven't gotten that one yet. Or you can make Mishkov tied to JVR. We need the karmic payoff for what happened with Nolan Patrick, okay? Okay. Let's see. Amadeo asks, since I'm going to be up in Canada, will I attend a Panthers Maple Leafs game? No, but what I did find out is the conference that I'm going to be at in Canada is going to be happening during the Stanley Cup final. And I thought about it, and I was like, yo, if I'm up there and on the very off chance that the Maple Leafs make the Stanley Cup, I'm going to be in the city when they could potentially be playing at least one game in the Stanley Cup final, and I would love to just be around that, because either you get to celebrate with Leafs fans or you get to kind of silently mock Leafs fans as they cry walking down the street. But let's be honest, the Leafs are probably not getting to the Stanley Cup final unless they buy tickets. Let's see. Jim Grasso says, give me a last tankathon spin before the Flyers get the number 1 pick. You know what? That's a fair request. Let's go over to the wheel really quickly. Let's take a gander. Where would the Flyers finish? By the way, Tankathon put out their own, here's our final spin before tonight, and the Flyers won. So let's see. Where would the Flyers finish if it goes based on Tankathon? They fall 2 spots. Seattle jumps up 5 spots. The Islanders jump up 8 spots, and we hate everything. Let's hope this doesn't happen. Seattle getting the number 1 overall pick would be whatever. I guess whatever. They're out west. The Islanders getting the number 2 pick, that would hurt. Okay. Let's just act like that didn't happen. We were having a positive time. We're not going to curse the name of Jim Grasso for asking for the spin, but it is kind of Jim's fault that happened. Just kidding, but maybe. Greg Bondarenko says, how about those Phantoms? A lot of really exciting stuff to talk about, which we'll get to later in the week. But the Phantoms are starting to look like a team that might make a little bit of a deeper run in the playoffs, and it's good to see some of the younger guys that presumably are going to be built around, or at least going to get a look from the big team, are performing well in the AHL playoffs. Like I said, we'll probably get there a little bit later on in the week. So Grabankin ended up being the 1-star. Was it last night? The last game? It's exciting stuff. Tony Louis says, I hope we get the 2nd pick. I don't feel comfortable taking Schaefer first with his injury, and taking a defenseman number 1 overall never works, and Misa is a special talent. To each their own. To each their own. Let's see. There was something else over here. Josh White says, this makes more sense. Oh, that was the percentages. Made more sense than when I taught German. That's right. That's right. Let's see. Chris Freed says, what happens if Detroit and Columbus are the 2 lottery picks? How would that work? They would do a redrawing. They would do a redrafting of the spot. Those guys would move up, and then you'd pick again. Jamie Rollo says 1D is actually harder to obtain than a 1C. There's a case to be made. Could be. Raymond Supper says Jonesy's been saying for 2 years to grab a number 1 defenseman. He'll do it. The one thing that I would say about that is Jonesy did make it sound like you do have a more likely chance of trying to go out and get a 1D through free agency, that like those guys can hit the market sometimes, whereas a 1C, it's really rare. Yukon 456 here with a little bit of levity on today's show before the draft lottery as we all kind of claw away and get stomach ulcers, says Ryan Ellis is our 1D. I wonder what Ryan Ellis is doing. I wonder if I could get Ryan Ellis to come on this show. I should try. I really should try. Ford says, I am here. You're welcome. Hockey isn't my jam. Give me some NBA talk. We'll get there in a little bit. We have to get to James Harden and what happened to him because it is really funny. Tony Louis also points out no defenseman taken first overall has been a Norris finalist since Potvin in the 80s. Ooh. All right, good number. Good stat out of Tony. But there always has to be one. Always has to be one. Let's see. Nick Johnson says, I can understand being upset over JVR, but can never understand the Patrick hate. I don't think it's Patrick hate. I think it's like, so here's the thing about Nolan Patrick, right? When he was here, there were legitimate concerns about like the motor. There were legitimate concerns about whether or not he like had the it factor, if he had the desire and the hunger to be one of the all-time greats. Which, in an interesting twist of fate, like he was taken around the same time as Ben Simmons, and Ben Simmons had the same kind of questions around him. But then, like, you would talk to other people. Some people like that dealt with him on a daily or weekly basis were like not huge fans, and then some were like, no, he's a really sweet kid. I look back on it now and I say I feel bad for the human being because he never really had the opportunity to show whether or not he had the it factor or whether or not he could develop into being a 1C. If you remember, like the cascading effect of Nolan Patrick's concussions and him being taken where he was is the Flyers ended up signing Kevin Hayes. And part of that was to take some of the burden off of Nolan Patrick having to be kind of thrust into that 2C role. And then somewhere along the lines, they tried to make Kevin Hayes a 1C, which he wasn't. And they tried to sell people that he could be a 2C, which he also wasn't. He really was a 3C. And you never had the ability to see Patrick jump over Hayes, have Hayes be the 3C that he probably was destined to be. and then see Nolan Patrick become the 2C and then hopefully even become a 1C. You just never had it. So Zilla says, I don't hate Patrick. I just think of Makar, and I feel sick every time. And the thing I always come back to people, and like now there's a narrative around the Nolan Patrick pick that's been kind of like co-opted by a lot of people in the aftermath, and it's like sort of revisionist history. But like at the time, all right, you have to go back. Nobody's going to do this, but I would encourage you. Find whatever Flyers podcast you like or you love, and go back to the time around the Nolan Patrick pick. And then fast forward a year and just listen to the way that people talked about the Patrick pick. Because there were a lot of people who made it sound like the Flyers always wanted Nolan Patrick. He was the guy, he was the guy, he was the guy. And over on Snow the Goalie, we told you that that was not, in fact, the preferred player from many of the scouts in the room, that Ron Hextall looked at the players that he had in the system, thought that the Flyers were going to be set on the blue line, and said, well, I'm going to go get the center. Now, in fairness, the scouts weren't all banging the table for Makar. They were fine with the idea of taking Heiskanen. And if they couldn't get him, they were also fine with Pettersson. There were at least a few who liked the idea of Pettersson. There were a lot of questions about Nolan Patrick's motor. He was not the guy. He was not the guy that everybody in that room wanted. Now, there are shows that if you go back, they will make it sound like Nolan Patrick was the guy that the Flyers wanted. In fairness, a lot of the pundits for over a year thought Nolan Patrick was the number one guy. A lot of pundits leading up to that draft still had him as the number one overall guy. Hischier kind of made that late push and then ended up becoming, on a lot of boards, the number one prospect. But it's just important, okay? Ray Supper says, Jason Martinez and Meltzer are also looking into getting Isaac Howard, or says that they're looking into getting Isaac Howard. Better than any prospect the Flyers have in the system. JBB says they're trading him, and Danny has the best chances of getting him. I mentioned this on Friday's very, what's the word that I would look for? It wasn't a cursed show, but the tech issue show on Friday. We did talk about Isaac Howard, and we did talk about the fact that the Flyers have some very attractive assets, and that if Tampa Bay would have to theoretically wait until the fall of 2026 to get a second-round pick when Howard goes and signs with another team, a compensatory pick, the Flyers could just offer that now and say, here you go for 2025 for this draft. The Flyers could also take a couple of those second-round picks and hand them to Tampa. Would they consider trading that Edmonton first for Isaac Howard? I don't know. It really depends on how they value the player himself. There have been some who really do think Isaac Howard could maybe be a second-line player. If you think he's more of a middle six guy or that he really isn't a third-line guy, you certainly don't trade a late first. But I think it's going to be interesting. All right. Let's see. Nick Johnson says Bundy would lose his mind over a lottery viewing. He would absolutely lose his shit. So we're not doing that. We're just not doing it tonight. Raymond Sepper says Comcast has the money to land Howard, and the Flyers have the ability to give Howard top 6 ice time on left wing. Maybe. I'm not opposed to the idea of getting him. I think he'd be a really good get. You're getting a Hobie Baker winner. You're getting a player that has been a winning commodity in college. Like I could see it. I think they'd be really smart to go after it for Serial. You know, I think that there's a very good chance the Flyers get involved. Will they ultimately land the player? I don't know. Let's see. Nick Johnson says the 4th best odds have never won the lottery since it's been implemented. However, the lottery isn't that old, so it's nice to see where we'll be. Okay. Chris Freed says you can write a PhD dissertation on the first-round picks the Philly teams took from 2016 to 2018. Yeah, it's horrible. Awful, awful, awful stuff. Joe Papel checking in, I'm assuming from sunny Florida, says Scott Lawton wins the Stanley Cup this year, which, listen, if you watched Toronto's series and you saw the block shot from Scott Lawton that then went the other way and Toronto scores a goal, Lawton, despite how expensive he ended up being for the Leafs, and despite the fact that there were a lot of Leafs fans that were ready to like throw him off a bridge at the end of the regular season, he has proven to be the kind of winning player that is kind of built for the playoffs. So good for him and good for the Leafs. And ultimately good for the Flyers because they got a hell of a haul for him. Let's see. Zilla asks, do we think Florida takes out the Leafs in 6 or what? I think Florida could win that series. I think it'll go 6 or 7. I'm not ready to say that they're definitely going to win, but I'm not positive. Okay, let's see. I skipped a bunch of comments here. I will try to get here. Okay. Brighton Condor, who I believe is new to the channel. Hello. Says, not draft related, but how do you think the Cam York RFA situation works itself out? Is there a case to be made for trading his rights? I would go on record and say I would trade Cam York. If I were the Flyers front office, I would get rid of Cam York. Not because he's a bad guy, not because he's a bad player. You have too many small defensemen. Emil Andre isn't expensive, and I think he's a good enough player. Jamie Drysdale is a guy that you traded your top North American prospect for, and for better or worse, you're tied to him for a while. Drysdale also had a pretty strong end to the season, and I could make a case that if he's somehow able to stay healthy, which he has not been able to in his NHL career, if he's able to be healthy and he's able to be kind of unleashed on the power play and to feel, I don't know what led to him feeling so hesitant to put the puck on net and to shoot the puck, especially on the power play. But if we can get him to the place that he was supposed to be, which is the lead guy, the quarterback on the top power play unit, well, he's got to be here. You can't win with a bunch of small defensemen. It's just not going to happen. And you can go back to Bradshaw on Snow the Goalie at the Flyers Carnival. He said as much, and then maybe got in trouble, but he said as much on the show. It's kind of hard to win with a bunch of small defensemen. I think York is a good player. I don't think York is a great player. I said on that draft night I would have taken Cole Caulfield. Caulfield's now a 30-goal scorer, which you have to hope Owen Tippett is going to be now. Meanwhile, York to me is just he's just a guy. I think York is like at best a second pair defenseman. I just don't see it. I know that there are people that like to point to some underlying numbers that say he is a much better player than that. I just don't think he is. And I don't get the feeling that he's going to want to come back on a cheap deal. Will they bridge deal it, and will he get a higher AAV than I would really want to give him? Maybe. I think that a bridge is probably likely if he's going to stay here. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Flyers have significant conversations about dealing him around the draft. We will see what happens. Josh White asks, given if we stay at number 4, who do you want the Flyers to take? And who do you think they'll take given one of Schaefer, Misa, Hagens, and Fronda will be available? Well, they'll take whoever's left of that group, is my guess. The scary thing is, if we go back to the end of the season on Press Row Show, Anthony was talking a lot about the idea of they really like Denoye. And I just have not seen enough people that I trust in, or talk to enough of the people that I trust in the hockey world who believe Denoye has been like criminally underrated. So like taking him at number 4 to me would be a mistake. But I don't watch these guys all year. So you kind of defer to scouts, but then at the same time, I kind of like seeing a team take somebody that's expected to be better. I don't know. Let's see. James Bond Flyers says Flyers fans would go nuts if they pick a defenseman. I think that on the surface, you're right. However, all it would take, right, is if it's framed the right way. Now, in fairness, if Schaefer goes number 1 overall to the Flyers, just for example, the conversation on the draft telecast is going to be about how the Flyers have needed a number 1 defenseman for a long time. You're going to get Danny Briere at a press conference afterwards explaining the rationale and saying, look, we fully acknowledge that we need a lot of players. We need a lot of top players. And we had this guy head and shoulders above everybody else. And we understand that there's a thought that we need a true number 1 center, in the pipeline. But we think that this guy is ready to perform in the NHL either this year or next year, and that he can become the anchor of the blue line. Fans, for better or worse, whether we like to admit it or not, are fickle, right? They could be pissed off to no end if the Flyers take a defenseman. It'll take one good Danny Briere press conference and a few plays in training camp for people to get turned around on the player. That's it. Let's see. Nick Johnson says Hextall moved on from Braden Shen too early. Patrick needed to start on the third line, not the second. We're kind of going back to the Patrick thing. Interesting watching Braden Shen play last night and lose. We'll get there in a second. AJ, our resident Rangers fan, says, sorry I'm late, but if no one mentioned it, The way the PWHL does the draft order makes more sense. After you are eliminated from the playoffs, they count all the points you earn. Most points gets the number one. That's wild. I don't know how to feel about that. Let's see. We have some wacky back and forth over in the comments. Nick Johnson says, remember on there was a podcast Bobby Clark went on and said, we wanted Makar, but the next guy took him, but he wasn't. It was Mira to Dallas that made Clark look much worse. Okay. I think they just wanted a defenseman, but it was Heiskanen was the one that was more discussed. Bill Gordon asks, can you clarify the error about the not 2 years the Flyers salary cap the head, or do we have money to spend? I don't know what that means. Do they have money to spend? Not a lot right now. They're looking to clear the salary for 2026 because there's a much better free agent class. I don't think you're going to see the Flyers intentionally spend to the cap with long-term commitments this year. If there's a player out there that makes sense for them to acquire, they'll do it. But they very much are looking at the 2026 offseason as being the one that they want to be like legitimate big splash free agent players. Let's see. Nick Johnson says, Quinn Hughes is also pretty upset with Tocchet leaving. If they get Tocchet, I'd only accept it for a better chance at trading for Hughes. It won't happen. Yeah, it's not happening. No chance. Not JD over on YouTube says, let's win that fucking lottery at 7. I agree. 100%. Let's see. Zilla says, I keep thinking to myself, Danny has something cooking. He's got big things planned. Now, if they actually work, that's another thing, but I think he's swinging for the fence. Correct. Andrew Fawcett believes that York has value. James Bond Flyers says that York should be traded for insubordination. Okay. Now, let's see. There's a lot of other stuff over here. I got to be really careful. We got to get through some more stuff here. Mr. Fluffy says, remember the Flyers like to reach for players within certain programs? Yeah, that's the fear. That is the fear. We don't need that. Okay. I'm going to kind of skip some of the other stuff here. While I love everybody in the comments, we have to kind of skip around. The draft lottery is exciting. Like I said, there's a very good chance we'll do a draft lottery show tonight. We'll do a live stream. We can all react together. We can all process things together. I did something like that back when the Flyers ended up getting Mishkov. I did it on the Snow the Goalie channel. It was a Twitter Spaces that it did right after the it was the draft itself. They got Mishkov, so it wasn't the lottery. Okay. This weekend proved why there is nothing like a Game 7 in the National Hockey League. Nothing like it. I know that baseball fans are convinced that Game 7 in Major League Baseball is like the peak of sports. And listen, we all understand the importance and the sudden death nature of the Super Bowl and the overall commercial success that is the Super Bowl. But we are currently in the midst of Game 7s in the NBA and Game 7s in the NHL. And we just watched them play out over the weekend again. The NBA Game 7s were largely lopsided and featured teams that looked like they really did effectively quit. And on the NHL side of things, we saw two vastly different games play out in front of our very eyes. I want to start with what happened with Colorado and Dallas, because that's the game that in theory could have some impact on the Flyers now and potentially longer term, because as we all know, the Flyers own the Colorado Avalanche's first-round pick this year. Now, Colorado is a likable enough team. I don't hate Colorado, but I actively cheered against Colorado, if for no other reason than I would rather see the Flyers get a better pick, a better positioning with that pick, which is not impacted by the draft lottery. I would rather see the Flyers get a more valuable end of the first-round pick by watching Colorado go out in the first round than, advancing to the Stanley Cup final and losing, and then you get like the 29th pick or whatever in the draft. I don't want that. I like the idea of watching them lose. So Colorado has a 2-0 lead. They go into the third period with a 1-0 lead, and 31 seconds into the third period, Colorado scores their second goal, and you start going, oh shit, this is bad. This is really, really bad. If you're a Dallas fan or if you're a Flyers fan who's only really watching because you care about the pick, you go, okay, has Dallas done anything to inspire any kind of confidence in that game 7 at home? No. And yet, I was texting people about the game while it was happening. I'm like, I'm not ready to give up on Dallas yet. I'm not giving up on them yet. And then Mikko Rantanen put on his big boy pants, and he took over Game 7. Mikko Rantanen was a goddamn stud. Mikko Rantanen was the kind of guy that you move heaven and earth to get on the trade market, and I'm still pretty convinced the Flyers at least poked around when he was available because you may or may not have remembered this. Carolina fucked up royally in their acquisition of Mikko Rantanen. Apparently didn't think it was important to either find out that he didn't want to stay in Carolina, or they were delusional enough to think that they were going to convince him somehow to stay there. It's really hard. I almost want to go off on this side tangent, but I have to be careful because we want to keep it on game. I'll come back to the Rantanen thing. So Rantanen plays really well, scores a goal about midway through the third period. Go, all right, lead's cut in half, fine. Rantanen takes over the game, scores again. You go, holy shit, are they going to do it? And then the guy that I wanted the Flyers to go after in restricted free agency this offseason, Wyatt Johnston, who did in fact re-sign with Dallas a month and a half ago, and good on him. He's 22, and he's got, I think, the third most goals by players aged 24 under in like the last however many decades. Like he's incredible. Wyatt Johnston scores the go-ahead goal, scores that third goal, and Dallas is losing their minds. And then at the very, very end, a puck makes its way out to center ice. Rantanen picks it up, finishes off a hat trick, takes out his former team, the team that he won the Stanley Cup with, the team that drafted him, the team that sent him to Carolina where he did not want to go. And ultimately, he knocks those guys out. And then he says after the game that while he's thrilled, he's asked about, what was it like to knock your former team out? And he says, well, they're still my brothers. Like, I still care about those guys. Like, we're enemies on the ice during the game, but he's like, those are people that I grew up with, that I developed with, that I won a cup with. And so you could tell the Rantanen thing was always really interesting because depending on who you listen to, there are two narratives. Rantanen got greedy and Colorado didn't want to meet him on the salary terms. And then there's another version of it where Colorado got cheap and didn't want to get creative to figure out how to keep him at the number that he wanted. And there's sort of like this third narrative out there that like there was a miscommunication and Rantanen would have probably taken less than he initially had requested or whatever. But Rantanen gets moved to Carolina, 2 months before the trade deadline, month and a half before the trade deadline. And at the time, the question was like, oh, okay. Because remember, it was a stunner. It was a shock. Like no one knew that Rantanen was getting dealt to Carolina. And it was, oh, wow, Carolina, what a coup. That's awesome. They traded Natchez, who wasn't going to re-sign in Carolina. They brought in this stud in Rantanen. You go, all right, this is great. Awesome stuff. He lands in Carolina, but there's no contract announced. And then people start going, well, how the hell do you trade for a guy with the value of Rantanen, with the star power of Rantanen? How do you not have a contract done? And then shortly thereafter, I think almost as soon as he lands in Carolina, something that was later revealed by / confirmed by Rod Brindamore, the head coach of Carolina, that Rantanen got there and said, like, there are 4 teams I would re-sign with, and you guys are not one of them. There are people who are trying to revisionist history this. There are people who are trying to say,
oh, if you look at the overall dealing of 2 trades, the one that sent Natchez out and brought Rantanen in, and then the one that sent Rantanen out and brought in Stankoven and some first-round picks. Overall, if you look at it from the macro perspective, getting Stankoven and some first-round picks for Natchez is actually a win.
I'm not sure that Stankoven and those 2 first-round picks are as good as Rantanen. And to that end, you ended up coming out on the worst side. Yes, you can look at it as, here's where we started. We made this trade for a superstar. That superstar didn't want to play here. We apparently didn't think it was important enough to get a contract worked out ahead of time or whatever, or we somehow thought we were going to convince him that playing here long-term was going to make sense, and then you traded him for assets that were better than what you initially traded for him in the first place. The problem is there's that middle piece. There's the Rantanen piece, and you watch how he played for Dallas, especially over the last 2 games of that series. But you watch how he took over the game in Game 7. That is a guy that is just built differently. That is a guy who is exactly what any Stanley Cup contending and eventual Stanley Cup winning team needs. Somebody who can grab the game by the balls and can ultimately win it for his team. That's what Rantanen did. And so I was thrilled. I was thrilled watching Dallas win because I thought it was a cool story. I like the revenge that Rantanen gets on Colorado, and it sets up a scenario where that Colorado pick could be in the high 20s instead of the low 20s, which is great. And there are a whole bunch of different things that have to happen. There are a whole bunch of different things about who needs to reach the conference finals and the way that things kind of get reordered. But the main thing is, it was just nice to see that, all right, this isn't going to be like the last pick or the next to last pick in the first round. So that was cool. And then you get to the other Game 7. The other Game 7 was pretty freaking wild as well. Winnipeg and St. Louis. We'll get there in a second, but I really just quickly want to go out because I saw that there were a few comments about that game. Let's see. Zilla says, Carolina really screwed the pooch with the whole mess. I mean, they got Stankoven out of it, but still, he's not better than Rantanen. He might be better than H, he's not better than Rantanen. Let's see. Max Miller says there was a small but very vocal section of Flyers fans who worshipped at the altar of Eric Tulsky, but he's been meh so far. He's been okay, but the thing that it seems like he lacks is, I don't know. Is there a social emotional side of the GM that's kind of missing there? I don't know how you complete a trade for a guy like Rantanen and you don't get the contract done. And if he doesn't want to play for you, you can't. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, listen, again, if I take
if you look at the player you initially traded and who you got back,
you can certainly, I guess, make the case that like maybe Stankoven and the firsts are better than he would have gotten by just putting Natchez on the market. But I don't know. I just think it was a bad look. And I think it was a bad look for the league. It was a bad look for front offices. It might have even been a bad look from the Players Association perspective. Just not great. Phil E. Fan says Danny should trade Forster in one of the late first, maybe a second for a young 1C. I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't know how valued Forster is. Does the call-up to Team Canada help his value on the trade market? I don't know. Maybe it's okay. I don't know. Zilla says Stankoven is a good player, and I don't know what Ford's talking about, but you're right, Russ. Dallas won that whole mess. David Carl apparently just announced that he's not leaving Denver. This is not surprising. If you have been paying attention to the Russ Joy Show, I have been talking about this for quite a while. I didn't see a scenario where David Carl was going to come to Philadelphia. I thought that the only way that he would ever even consider moving east was maybe if the Rangers job became available, maybe, but I still didn't think that was a guarantee, especially given how quickly things can kind of get turned over. He signed an extension. He signed a multi-year extension to remain with Denver. The quote that came out from the press release, Denver is my home. Denver is home for me and my family. That's it. So the David Carl dream is done. If you are a Flyers fan and you were holding out hope for whatever reason, I've been trying to tell you it wasn't going to happen. He's now off the market, which then means if you're a Flyers fan, you've heard the names already, Tocchet. You've heard the name Ferschweiler. You've heard the name Bradshaw, maybe getting a look. Could a Ferschweiler-Bradshaw duo be in play? It is possible. But David Carl, not going to the pros, at least not yet. At least not this offseason. All right, so there's that. Really quickly on last night's game, if you stayed up and watched it, the best part of Winnipeg coming back the way they did is that Hallebeck looked like he kind of like snapped his head back on the right way. That game, while interesting, I think if you line up the 2 Game 7s head-to-head, St. Louis versus Winnipeg, Dallas versus Colorado, we could all probably agree they look like entirely different sports, or these look like entirely different leagues, like levels of leagues. I enjoyed watching a double overtime game. I was totally fine with watching the home team win. But they're going to get smoked. Like, Winnipeg lining up across from Dallas, Dallas could maybe take that series in 5, maybe 6. I just think Dallas is playing at an entirely different level right now. So you have that. That's all I'm going to say about that one because I'm looking at the time here, and we might be doing another show later. The last thing is there was another Game 7, and there was Game 7 that I was very, very interested in because I got bamboozled a little bit. I did. I looked at the Clippers and Nuggets series in the NBA, and I watched a Clippers team riding on the back of Kawhi Leonard, who looked like he was almost back to peak powers, like to a level that people didn't think he was ever going to get back to, and watching an efficient James Harden. And I really did start to believe that the Clippers had a chance to take down Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray and that, Denver Nuggets team that's won a title together. And I thought that there was a really good opportunity. And I think the Clippers clearly screwed it up. The Clippers, they fought back and they won Game 6 and they forced a Game 7 back in Denver. But I don't think that game was ever particularly close. Things they went very sideways in the fourth quarter. To a point where Harden wasn't even in the game. I don't even know how I got the balloons going here, but Harden was out of the game, and the Clippers started I think they cut the lead to 15, something like that. I was like, okay, there's not nearly enough time left. Also, the Nuggets are mentally checked out. This game's over. And so then you go, all right, well, how did James Harden do? Because what do we know about James Harden? We know that James Harden is allergic to performing in a Game 7. He can have some playoff games where he looks really, really good. But for the most part, James Harden is an absolute shit show in Game 7. And what happened? James Harden puked all over himself in the worst of ways. And unfortunately for the Clippers, they got to find out what Sixers fans have found out. They got to find out what Nets fans found out. They got to find out what Rockets fans found out. James Harden is just not built for meaningful games in the playoffs. He never has been, and unfortunately for him, he never will be. Game 7 was one of the worst performances he had this postseason, and that Game 7 is going to be something that's going to stick with him because even though the final score was a 19-point game, 120-101, that's not what really matters. What matters is how Harden actually did in the final game and his inability to get anything of value going from the field in this one. He finished with 7 points on the night. He went 2 of 8 from the field. He went 1 of 4 from beyond the arc. He was a minus 29 on the night. Not that it matters, but if it does to you, that minus 29 is the worst plus minus that he's had in a playoff game since the Sixers lost to the Celtics in Game 7 back in the 2023 postseason. That game, of course, he was a minus 30 on the night. Harden just looked like a shell of himself. He honestly, and it's weird, a guy who plays like Harden, you can tell the games where he's mentally in it and the games where he's not. The games where he's driving and the games that he's not. The games that he's hoisting up shots and the games that he's not. When the Clippers won Game 6, he had 20 field goal attempts. He went 3 of 8 from downtown. In Game 7, he goes 2 of 8, only 1 of 4 from beyond the arc. He just did not look like he was ready to meet the moment. And so once again, you have seen James Harden come up short in the postseason. And like I was saying, the thing that I think is honestly a shame is that we were starting to get to see what it looked like to have Kawhi Leonard playing like Kawhi Leonard again. And I will always be a fan of the player. I will always be a fan of what Kawhi Leonard could be. And even though he handed the Sixers one of the most painful playoff losses in any of our lifetimes, I loved watching Kawhi Leonard play when he was at the peak of his powers. And for a guy who flat out hasn't been able to be healthy, hasn't been able to remain healthy, he scored 20 or more points in every game in this series. He had a 39-point outburst in Game 2, had 27 points in the game that they won in Game 6. This was not on Kawhi Leonard. So the Clippers are out. Harden puked all over himself. That's a shame. I'm going to say the same thing that I said on Friday's show. If you just take a look at the NBA playoff bracket as things are currently set up, and as the playoffs have already moved on to the second round, we saw Pacers and Cavs. You get Thunder Nuggets in one of the Western Conference matchups. You get Timberwolves and Warriors. And I hope that Anthony Edwards rips out Draymond Green's throat. Not actually. But I would love to see Draymond try to fuck with Anthony Edwards. Because Anthony Edwards is not fuckwithable. Okay? If Draymond Green tries the same bullshit that he tried in Game 7 against the Rockets, where he gets swiped on the arm and he does a jumping, flailing forearm shiver, Anthony Edwards will deliver a spine buster that would make Batista proud. Okay? I hope Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves advance in 5 games. Now, if that goes 7, it's going to be a heated battle. It is going to be a nasty series. Ideally, if you're a basketball fan, Thunder and Timberwolves would be a beautiful Western Conference final. On the Eastern Conference side of things, I'd like to see, I guess, the Cavs get through. Because I still don't know if I believe in the Cavs, but I do think the Cavs are really good. I'd like to see the Cavs get through, even though they lost Game 1. See the Cavs get through. And I don't like the Celtics. So I'd like to see, if the Cavs are really the best team in the East, I'd like to see the Cavs take on the Celtics and knock them out. Would it be fun to watch the Knicks take down the Celtics? I hate the Knicks significantly less than I hate the Celtics. So if the Knicks somehow pull off the upset, cool. But I really hate the Celtics. Really, really do. As a Philadelphia overall fan, I hate Boston teams more than I hate New York teams. So again, make of that what you will. Could we ultimately, if I had to put money on it right now, Thunder and Celtics is your most likely finals matchup? Yeah, I think that's probably it. I think Thunder Celtics is probably where we're going to end up. And it'll be a hell of a series. Ideally, I'd like to see Minnesota get to the finals and win. Whoever comes out of the West, as long as it's the Thunder or the Timberwolves, I'll happily cheer for. If the Warriors somehow make the finals and Jimmy Butler is the reason, I'll also cheer for that just because of the chaos and the amount of people that are going to be pissed off in the aftermath of the Sixers not bringing back Jimmy and all of the insanity that caused. So there you go. All right. I think that's where we're going to end for now. I say for today. I can't promise you that there's going to be a live show, draft lottery reaction show. But as of right now, I'm open to the idea. It just depends on the kids' schedules, bedtime, if the little ones go down in time. The draft lottery is supposed to start at 7. So there is a potential here that sometime around 7, you could see a new video popping up on the Russ Joy Show YouTube channel where I'll be watching it over on a side screen and we can react in real time. I'm not guaranteeing it's going to happen, but it might. So just kind of keep your eyes peeled. Make sure that you ring the bell on the channel. You subscribe, since we're over 1,000 subscribers. Subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you get notified whenever the show goes live. If you have YouTube notifications disabled on your phone, give them the little, let them happen. Just allow for notifications. So you'll get notified every time we go live with a new show here on the Russ Joy Show. So there's that. J Talks at 49 really quick says, Russ, before you go, can we talk about the utter horse bleep all of afternoon Philly sports radio has become? Brett is just flat out awful. He's talking about Spike. And 97.5 is sunk. I think the WIP afternoon show is fine. I know that there are people who don't like it. I don't think it's a bad show. I think it clearly is a good enough show to beat the shit out of the opposition. The real interesting question here would be, if Missinelli were to move to afternoons, does he take anything away from Spike and Jack and Ike? And I'm not sure that he does. I talked about on Friday, Josh Innes kind of flirted with the idea of, do I apply for this? If Josh Innes were to get hired there would be at least one ratings book where he'd pull some people over because people would be ready for the insanity. But I think he'd flame out again. He'd probably crash out again because that's just, unfortunately for him, in his career, that seems to be what happens. He's kind of like supernovas. He burns really bright and then burns out. 97.5, though, I have no idea what to tell you. I actually thought about it since Friday. Could they, I guess they'll keep Salchunas with Kincaid in the morning. Could they hand the midday show fully to Colarulo and then have Missinelli move to the afternoon? Maybe that'll work. Like, maybe that's the thought, but man, if you're at 97.5, man, I feel bad. I feel bad. Maybe one of the weekend shows gets a look. I don't know. All right, I might be back later tonight on Monday. If not, thank you to everybody who joined me live on YouTube, X, and Facebook. If you're a podcast listener, of which there are quite a few, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you can leave a 5-star rating. Leaving a 5-star review is also nice. You can say nice things. If you're on Spotify, you can also leave a 5-star rating. You just go to the show page and you rate it, and that would be very nice. And big thank you to Zilla, who blessed us with our first super chat here on the Russ Joy Show live. So thank you to everybody who joined me. I will talk to all of you possibly Monday night during the draft lottery, and if not, I'll be back on Wednesday here on the Russ Joy Show. I've been Russ Joy, but you knew that already because you're smart, and it's also the name of the show. I'll talk to each and every one of you very soon here on the Russ Joy Show. Keep your fingers crossed for your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers, and getting a little bit of luck in the draft lottery. Talk soon.